Hello, this is Kris Nelson for evolvedconsciousness.org. Thank you for listening. It's been a while since I did a presentation. The last one was in July, and it was a sort of part one out of the new work that I've been doing for this presentation that I'll be doing now and the next two. I've decided to split them up, I guess, into 4 parts. So reality processing was to explain how I've been able to understand how consciousness processes reality, and it deals with this presentation, which will be dealing with consciousness and truth and the 2 levels of truth, which I've already talked about in previous presentations, the truth level 1 and the truth level 2, and that's in many places, especially consciousness and causality symbolism, where I've emphasized that aspect of existence contrasted to consciousness and how it relates to the truth level 1 being the reality that is, and truth level 2 being our capacity to determine the true way to live, the right way, the good way. So this presentation, most of the infographics for the 4 parts of the presentations were done in June, and then I've been slacking off and not doing them, so here is the new information being presented about how, in terms and definitions, we're going to start with on consciousness and truth, define some terms and definitions, and then go into more in-depth look at to how these things work in our reality that anyone can demonstrate just by thinking about what I'm talking about. Verify it through your own life. So the first infographic is consciousness, and that's from Latin con, which means with, and scio, meaning knowledge. Conscio, consciousness. So conscio, knowledge with, and then ness. When you put ness at the end of a word as a suffix, it's the action, quality, or state of something. So the action, quality, or state of being with knowledge. That's what consciousness means in a pure etymological sense. As you can see, it completely revolves around knowledge and having the capacity to have knowledge within you, not simply being a piece of knowledge, like a human is just, that's knowledge, you're a human, that's a piece of knowledge, you being human, but to have knowledge within you in greater capacities, well, that's what consciousness is actually about, at that basic level of knowledge. This is from the Proto-Indo-European sky or ski, I don't know how you pronounce it, and it means to cut, split, or dissect. And that's what the root of knowledge is to cut, split, and dissect. And that's what we do, is we split things, we compare things, we dissect things, one thing contrasted to another in order to learn about it. So this is of being with knowledge, to see the variability, multiplicity, and diversity, what is and is not another. It's about identity. So the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of the universe, reality, and existence. If you didn't cut, split, and dissect the things in reality, or if reality itself wasn't already cut, split, and dissected into the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of all the things that exist as identifiable things in themselves, that's what identity is, then you would have no knowledge, because everything would be one thing. There wouldn't be variability, multiplicity, and diversity. Nothing would be cut, split, or dissected, and you would have no identity, except for identity of one. Whatever that one massive amalgamated goop would be, everything put together, it would be nothing. It'd be something, but it'd be nothing. It would actually be nothing, because it would just be this one thing, and that's all there would be. So we have also, apart from consciousness, we have conscience. So even if you don't look at the word, the etymology of conscience, if you know con is with, and science, well, science is knowledge. I've done that in my previous presentations. I've gone into the word science, I've gone into the word consciousness etymologically, and I've done presentations on that. So this is just a summarization, a recapitulation, more condensed from those presentations, and more information that I've learned since then. So conscience is with knowledge right there, and science is knowledge, so with knowledge. But more specifically, conscience conscience is related to moral conscience. So why is with knowledge, specifically etymologically with knowledge, or knowledge together, why is that related to moral conscience, knowledge together of our behavior? Because that's what you can do with con or com. You can do with or together. So you're either with knowledge or you know something together. As in with other people you know something together, which would be your moral conscience of knowing how to act towards other people and other people to act towards you. That's what conscience is. So it's not strictly being with knowledge. It's a play on, I view it as a play on the con. Instead of with knowledge, it's knowledge together. And then that implies together means you and another, means two people. So you can have consciousness alone, because you're just with knowledge. If you have a consciousness that's capable of absorbing knowledge and doing something with it, retaining knowledge, then you have consciousness. But for conscience to be in existence, you need someone else there. And that's how morality works. I haven't gone into this, but you can just imagine it. If you're the only being in the universe or on the planet that has a capacity to understand morality, to have a conscience, then morality will only exist because you are there, because you can understand morality and you can identify with the concept of morality and live by it or against it. And if you don't have the capacity to understand what morality is, then you're living amorally and you're just doing things, and they could be moral or immoral. You wouldn't know because you don't have that concept or the capacity to understand the concept of morality through your own actions. But that requires an other. If you're alone and you're doing actions and there's no other to consider, then there's no morality. Anyways, I'm getting off track. This is other work that I've done that I haven't presented yet. But just to clarify on conscience and how we can see etymologically, knowledge together implies someone else. But if you're with knowledge, all that implies is you in existence. Conscience requires you and someone else. So Latin con, with or together, and knowledge. You could say it's all the same thing. Fine, con science with knowledge, no problem. But why is the moral aspect there? Why has this become a moralized aspect? So I look at the etymology and I see together with knowledge, or knowledge together. It implies a me and you. We have Latin conscience. So that conscience, conscience, is the same as the Greek syneidesis, and it literally means with knowledge. So again, if you take knowledge together or together with knowledge, and you say, no, that's too much of an extrapolated etymological meaning, okay, sure, I admit. But again, it still comes down to, it means regarding morality, and why does it mean that if it only means with knowledge? And we'll see later, it's part of this presentation. Syneidesis and synderesis. I've talked about this in other presentations. Syneidesis is with knowledge, and you gain that knowledge. Knowledge comes from the past. You have to have a memory to retain knowledge. It comes from the past. It doesn't come from the future. The future hasn't happened. Syneidesis as knowledge and is gained from the past. It's about the past, what has happened. And synderesis is about guiding yourself into the future with that knowledge of the past. So how do we guide ourselves into the future? What is true living about? It's about living morally. So what's the knowledge of the past in order to live into the future? Since we're together, we're other people, it's all about morality. That's the most important knowledge for higher living. So conscious, conscious and conscience, conscious and conscience are the same etymologically. Conscience is directly linked with syneidesis, both relating to morality. Knowledge together is moral knowledge about living right, the basis for realer life. So my other presentations have gone into this, especially regarding the Egyptian symbolism, Kamat, and the Egyptian Ka alphabet symbolism and all that. If you go look into it, you'll understand more, and what realer, higher, truer life is, a life of Ma'a, living under Ma'at, the concept, the imagined concept of Ma'at, which is balance and reciprocity and order and right and good. So do check out previous presentations if you want more information. I've talked about much of this before. Slide number 2, consciousness. Patterns of the past and present are recognized as knowledge. There are patterns in the world and within consciousness. We can recognize patterns in the world that repeat, and we can also recognize patterns within our own consciousness that are abstractions of patterns in the world, and we can develop even more pattern recognition. Meaning, value, and purpose is attributed to the patterns seen. So whenever we see a pattern, we recognize it, and then we can even attribute a meaning to that pattern, why that pattern is repeating in reality, the value of it, that pattern's worth more than another pattern we see, the purpose, and we attribute a purpose, some similar to meaning. So I'll get more into patterns in a bit, but anything that repeats is a pattern. You know, if 1 + 1 = 2, and then you have 3 and 4 and 5, well, the pattern is you add 1 every time. Also a beep. A beep, you hear a beep, and then 5 seconds go by, there's no beep, and then there's another beep, and then another 5 seconds go by, and then there's another beep. So the beep isn't a constant in reality, but it's a pattern. There's a pattern for the beep because it goes into existence, and then it's out of existence, then it comes back into existence. Anyways, I'll leave that for later, but just to give you an understanding of what I'm trying to get to with patterns and repetition. Interaction in social living has patterns of behavior. That's how we recognize morality. Certain patterns repeat. Negative patterns, then we identify them and see the results and the consequences that they lead to. There is a repetition of results and consequences to actions. We judge and learn from our past actions, using that knowledge to guard and watch over our future actions to not repeat the same mistakes. This is how to perceive, conceive, understand, and navigate reality with other consciousness beings, learning morality. That's what it's about. We watch over our and guard over our future actions to not repeat the same mistakes that we learned from in the past. That's how we perceive, conceive, understand, and navigate reality from the past with other beings. We learn from our mistakes, and we learn morality in order to live better into the future. That's what all life's about. That's the purpose of evolving. You want higher consciousness? Learn morality and live it. And learn how to develop your consciousness to have the proper inner vision of the outer vision of reality, so that you see things clearly. You need to have your inner vision clear so that you have the proper outer vision. So it's not just about moral knowledge. Yes, that gets you to a more realer, higher, truer living, but you need to have a developed cognitive capacity as well in order to promote a continuation of your evolution in consciousness and not just remain at a position of moral well-being. So science is repeatability to demonstrate knowledge. That's what science is. Think of the scientific method. You do something, you test it, and then if someone wants to verify your results, they repeat it. That's what science is. And that's, as we're going to see, that's how truth is determined. That's how knowledge is verified. That's how truth is verified. Because in veracity, veritas, verifiability, they all come from the same root of truth. That's in a few slides. I always tend to get ahead of myself. Sorry about that. So, science, conscience, consciousness. You see how they all relate? Patterns of repeatability. Patterns of repeatability can be recognized and demonstrated, especially those related to interaction with others, which is morality. So patterns of repeatability can be recognized and demonstrated. The beeping, a cold, it persists for a certain amount of time. Your life persists for 70 years or whatever. There's patterns of repeatability. I am a pattern of repeatability. I don't have a cessation in the persistence of my existence, but I'm still repeating. Since I was born, my cells replicate and they repeat, and they allow me to repeat into the future. Based on where I am now, I can continuously repeat the pattern of who I am. My body repeats into the future. But the most important thing about human interaction and living into the future is morality. That's the pattern of repeatability that we need to learn. When a certain action happens over and over and the consequences are always the same, and we can learn that the actions are a negative because they always produce a negative consequence. This is science. It's repeatability. This is why morality, it's why I have a site, which I haven't worked on much, but natural law science, because morality, not just natural law as in any law like cause and effect, but natural moral law is a science because it is repeatable, because you can repeat what was done and you can always have the same actions, the same consequences produced. So this is true from within consciousness. This is the true vision from within consciousness that leads to the wisdom of right action. The ability to see correctly is higher consciousness. So yeah, that's one part of higher consciousness, is seeing correctly, and then that allows you to reach another part of higher consciousness, which is to act morally, to be moral. But you need that capacity in consciousness to dig deeper into morality, what it is, to understand it more, rather than to just know it as a fact. Something is wrong, you can know something is wrong, but do you understand why it's wrong? And the why of logic leads you to that truth, to actually understand that truth of why it's wrong, rather than just have knowledge. Knowledge, oh, that's wrong. So you can just regurgitate that that's wrong because someone told you a piece of knowledge that is wrong, but do you actually have the understanding to validate that knowledge? Or maybe that knowledge is misinformation. Alright, slide 3, more on consciousness. The vision of the past we judge is syneidesis, which involves memory. And the vision of the future, using that knowledge to watch and guard against mistakes, is synderesis or synteresis. These are both conscience from consciousness. Syneidesis and synteresis are forms of conscience, and they come from consciousness. Conscience and conscious etymologically mean with knowledge or knowledge together, depending on how you want to look at it. Specifically, the knowledge of living together is morality. This is how higher order consciousnesses survive optimally, through knowledge of cooperative behavior and living. Behavioral analysis is recognition of patterns of behavior. And also, just to emphasize on, if you went through reality processing, I mentioned inner and outer vision in those presentations. So here we're talking about the inner vision. We have two aspects of vision, one to the left and one to the right, one looking to the east and one looking to the west, one that looks towards the past and one that looks towards the future. And I've talked about this in symbolism of the Egyptian symbolism of the two lionesses, Akara, or I forget the name of it. Anyways, that's in the other presentation. You can go look at it. And elemental quaternity. I forget the rest of the hyphenated name of that presentation, but it's called Elemental Quaternity, and you'll have an infographic in there, pretty sure, on the two lionesses. But there's not much of an explanation. I'm just bringing it forth to tie back into that presentation. This information is more relevant to that symbol that I'm bringing forth about the two lionesses. Anyways, the correspondence of social interaction gives us feedback for guiding our future actions. Morality is not some external force. It is determined objectively from reality, existence, as our optimal interaction in existence. If there was no humans in existence, if there were no humans on Earth, let's limit it to Earth. Or you could go out into the whole universe and say no beings with consciousness capable of understanding morality. But if we just limit it to Earth, we'll say no beings capable of understanding morality on Earth. Remove all humans, and there's only amoral animals, then you don't have morality anywhere. Morality doesn't exist anywhere if you are not creating morally or have the capacity to understand how to create morally or immorally. All the actions done by amoral animals will be amoral animals because they don't have the capacity to act within a moral or immoral desire or care to engage in an action that can be classified or identified as moral or immoral. They're not moral or immoral beings. They can't do moral or immoral actions. They're doing amoral actions because they don't have an understanding of morality or immorality. So I have work on this that I haven't presented either. So essentially, morality only comes from within. It comes from us, consciousness, understanding how other beings, how other consciousnesses, how other higher order consciousnesses capable of understanding morality are engaging together. I understand morality and you understand morality, or at least we have the capacity because our consciousness is of that higher order capacity. Even if we're dumbing ourselves down and we want to ignore thinking about reality, we want to believe we're amoral animals, well no, even if you ignore morality and you engage in immorality, you're not an amoral animal. You're choosing to ignore your abilities of consciousness to discern reality, and you're living immorally, trying to be an amoral animal. Anyways, I'll stop that there because that's getting too much off topic. But anyways, I was just saying the vision, the inner vision of the past and the future requires the vision of the external reality. The external vision in order to provide the inner vision. The external light of existence upon our external senses provides evidence for how we are living and interacting, allowing us to learn through the internal light of consciousness and not repeat mistakes. So substitute light with vision, exactly what I was talking about just a moment ago. This is what it's all about. It's evidence for living and interacting with others, for cooperation, and that's what consciousness leads to, in conscience, is for that cooperative living in order to survive optimally together. That's what it's all about. Morality. That's what it's all about. It's about optimal survival together. If you want to ignore morality, then it's about trying to survive yourself with disregard for others, and it's all about you and survival and dog eat dog, when it's so much simpler to cooperate, it's more efficient, and you're not being immoral by violating others simply on a lower consciousness basis to survive and perpetuate your survival in existence. Infographic number 4. This is pattern recognition and repeatability. I just wanted to emphasize, if you're having trouble understanding the brief aspects of pattern recognition and repeatability that I've been mentioning and how it relates to consciousness and seeing patterns, as patterns are everywhere in reality, and patterns are the basis. Patterns and repeatability are the basis for knowledge. Everything that repeats can be considered a pattern of some kind. Even if it's not very colorful or inventive of a pattern, it's very basic and simple, it's still a pattern. It has a repeatability, and everything in existence is repeatable and hence is a pattern. So when we are consciousness and we recognize patterns in reality, essentially everything is a pattern at one level or degree or another, and it's repeatable, and that's what we do as consciousness. We're pattern recognition. We recognize the patterns and the repeatability because that's what's in reality. That's knowledge. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I know it increases plus 1, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It increases by 2. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. It increases by 2, except instead of even numbers, it's odd numbers. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. That's the Fibonacci. And then I can get into more complex ones. If I do 1, 5, 3, 7, 5, 9, 7, 11, 9, 13, 11, then you'd have to think more to use your inner light of consciousness on this the external light you see of these numbers, and you could try to envision the pattern that is actually behind the scenes in the overt particulars that we're seeing of these numbers. There's actually hidden universals, you could say, behind the appearances of these numbers. There are a hidden layer of substance of numbers that are producing this number set. These numbers can continue as long as you understand the underlying pattern, the substantive, foundational structure that produces the number sequence. So you have 1 to 5 is plus 4 minus 2, plus 4 minus 2, plus 4 minus 2. That's all the pattern is. Very easy. The next one is more difficult. I'll leave you to figure it out if you want. Also related to this, in infographic 4b, this is, I believe, from Consciousness and Causality Symbolism Part 2, probably one of the last infographics in that short presentation. This has to do just more emphasis on an understanding of patterns, repeatability, and how that relates to, as that presentation demonstrated, causality, and how patterns and repeatability are cycles, they're loops, they are feedbacks, they're recursive. So if you want to understand, if you never went through that presentation and you want some more information on presentations regarding repeatability and patterns and persistence, which I'll be getting more into shortly, and in the next presentations, I believe. Well, this one, 4b, in that presentation on causality and consciousness symbolism, Part 2, or Consciousness and Causality Symbolism, Part 2. Anyways, so check that out if you want to. So here on infographic 5 is, I guess, a summary of other work I've done, which I have links to at the bottom here. Analogy, balance, and in between, words, reality, and proportions, and logic, as part of the Language and Reality Part 5 presentation. So logic, ratio, and proportions. Ratios and proportions are patterns formed between things in reality/existence. If we process our perceptions in parallel to reality or existence, then we can create art or artificial things in reality existence through our arms, our artifices, our arms, that are in harmony with the existing ratios, proportions, and patterns that function in reality. So you want to create things in reality, you want to create patterns of repeatability, persistence, some persistent thing in reality. Well, you better make sure you understand how existing things operate in reality in order to modify and make something that operates and functions within the same patterns and parameters of functionality of that thing, within the laws of existence. You're going to process in parallel to reality and existence rather than imagine things that don't exist and believe them to be real. Processing and outputting into reality existence with the correct ratios and proportions is to create in harmony with the existing patterns, structures, and laws of reality or existence. So when you process with logic and then you output with your actions and the wisdom of reality, with the correct ratio, when you have the correct proportion, when you compare one thing to another and you find the pattern and you repeat it and you verify it, which is science, the repeatability, you repeat it and it's still there, that's an aspect of existence. Well, then you have the ratio, you have the proportion, you understand, you've compared things in reality, you've corresponded and correlated, and now you understand how the harmony works. And now you can repeat that harmony in existence through those patterns, instructions, and laws of reality and existence that you already understand. This is how morality works. Proportions of one thing to another, action, something that didn't exist that now exists, an action, was it a wrong action or a right action? Well, what happens after? What's the new existence that emerges as a result of the causal stimulus of that action? Well, there's the consequence. Is that a wrong consequence? Is that bad? Is it evil? Yeah, well then the action that produced it isn't a good action if it clearly produces a wrong result. So this is just how our consciousness functions and everything in reality. That's all I'm doing is just describing what I've analyzed in reality about myself, about others, and I'm putting it forth as information. You want to deny it? Deny it. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Awesome. If you want to try to disprove what I'm talking about, well, go into reality and find some aspects that disprove what I'm saying, because everything I'm talking about is what I understand from reality itself. It's not from reading books. Some of the information I've gotten is when I did my work on the trivium and stuff, but a lot of it is just thinking about reality. So if you have other people that have written stuff about this before and they disprove it, please let me know, because I went researching on a few things, but the stuff that I'm talking about I don't really find many people talking about. Even the old philosophers in the 20th and 19th and 18th century, they had a lot of people are infatuated with the originality. That's how you become famous. Whoever comes up with an original thought, an original concept, and is the first one to propagate it, becomes famous. That's how it works in industry with inventions. You're the first one. You're known for being the first one, and then it's always, even if someone comes up with a better version and tweaks it and makes a better version, well, all you've done is modify what the first person has discovered and created and invented. So the first person always gets the emphasis. That's why people are, that's the way I see it, is people all have this infatuation with all these old philosophers. Yeah, they talk about a lot of truth, and from what I've read, they also have things in error. So you can't just take, Aristotle is 100% right, and Plato's 100% right, or Leibniz, or Goethe, or however you pronounce his name, or whoever else you want to talk about, Bertrand Russell, and this person was always right. No one's always right. We need to get over this cult of personality and this infatuation with these previous philosophers, and just get with the truth in reality and look at reality to demonstrate things. So sure, go through old philosophers and see if they're talking about stuff that you haven't considered before. Go through all their material, take hours and hours and hours, and spend weeks and months. I didn't want to do that. I've read some of their stuff, and sure, they got good stuff, but when I look for things specifically that a lot of people aren't talking about right now in our times, and maybe there's a hint of it here and there in the past, they get some aspects of it, but they're still confused about other aspects. So I find personally that I just think about reality from the information that I've gathered from other people, and it helps me look at reality itself to see what's in reality. And sure, I'll go read other people's things, but I don't put an emphasis on what they say based on their authority of being the first who came out with a concept or idea or a certain philosophy. So now they're the godfather of a certain philosophy, and you can't go against what they say about a certain philosophy because they're always right. Well, that's not the way it works in reality. Truth is always right. Reality is always right. And what people conceive about reality and try to explain about reality can be wrong. So if I'm wrong, please demonstrate it. Because what I'm doing is demonstrating how reality and consciousness functions, and all you have to do is take the time to think about it and verify it in your own life, and you'll see that what I'm talking about is how things work. And it's beautiful to see and beautiful to understand. You understand more about yourself. This is what it's all about, is know thyself. That's why my focus is on these root causal factors of ourselves and why we create these things and how we create our reality. Because that's the real underlying foundational factor. It's not the immediate things going on in our lives, the government and the police and the military and the monetary system and all these symptoms that we've created. You want to tackle the police and the order followers and the monetary system and the bankers and the Vatican and all these things. All these things are symptoms of the degenerate, well, maybe not degenerate, but devolved state of consciousness that we're in, the deplorable garbage state of consciousness that we're in, the inability to think. People just don't want to think. So we're in a lot of trouble in understanding why we are creating the world, the human level reality that we've created, the human way of living that we've created. You tackle government, military, money. People need to understand these things to understand that they are wrong and why they're wrong. But why did they even get created in the first place? And this is the problem, is because we don't even understand how our consciousness makes sense of reality to develop our worldview, our self-image, our sense of self, our self-worth. And we get beliefs conditioned into us because we're not able to process reality ourselves, and then we believe what other people tell us, and then we live according to the beliefs other people tell us that we need to live by, and we're never verifying things for ourselves. We're not critical thinkers. We don't think enough. That's the state of humanity now and back in thousands and thousands of years. That's the problem The problem is consciousness. That's what has always been the problem, is consciousness. I don't think I have this in any of my presentations. It's in my notes somewhere, but I'll find it and I'll try to put it in the future presentation on this 4-part series, I guess. But consciousness is the problem. Do you want to know what the root of the problem is? Do you really want to know? Well, it's consciousness. That's what the whole problem is. It's all consciousness. That's where the problem is. We are our own worst enemies. We lie to ourselves more easily than we lie to others. And we need to. Because we want to believe in whatever we want to believe in. We don't want the truth. We want to believe whatever we want to believe that makes us feel good, that keeps us perpetuating and sustaining our delusional worldviews and our sense of self and our self-images, because we can't face the truth and see how corrupted we are. So we just want to believe whatever we want to believe. So we lie to ourselves, and as a result of believing our own lies, we then lie to others. Or we believe other people's lies, and then we keep lying to ourselves, and we lie to others, and we're just basically propagating lies left and right all over the place, because we think they're truths. Consciousness needs to be developed in a critical thinking capacity to understand, to know thyself. How does your cognitive capacity work? How does your affective emotional capacity work? How does your active capacity work into the world? The trinity of consciousness, all these things, the psychology, attachment, patterns and reality, repeatability, truth, morality, how to understand these things for ourselves. Where do they come from? They don't come from some force outside of us. They don't come from some being. They come from us. It all comes from consciousness. That's what I've been trying to get at the beginning of 2015 in my presentations on consciousness and causality symbolism. This is the big revelation I've had in correcting my work, where I used to externalize, objectify, and reify what I used to call truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law, blah, 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 blah. I used to put it all into some objectified external existence so that it could be objective and real. But it's not. All they are concepts that come from within us that we use to symbolize and give an identity to aspects of reality. Anyways, I'm always going on off tangents because there's a lot of subtext to even the information I'm presenting. There's minutia of details of clarity that can get you to understand it, and if you don't have it, then you might have some trouble understanding what I'm trying to present here. Anyways, infographic number 6, continuing with logic, is logic and knowledge. Knowledge is something cut, divided, and separated for it to be known as it is, apart, split, and dissected, compared and contrasted to something else. That's what I've been talking about. To compare and contrast. That's how persistence, repeatability, and patterns are detected. Anyways, to understand what is now cut requires collecting the pieces to assimilate them into a non-contradictory manner. So to understand what you cut, what's been cut, divided, and separated, dissected, split, and is apart, needs to be compared and contrasted to something else. So you need to collect one thing to compare it to another. But if you just have one thing and another, then it's just one thing and another. So you need to collect them and then compare them in a non-contradictory manner. And logic is from the Proto-Indo-European root leg, meaning to collect. Patterns are detected by comparing data collected about reality. Logic is required for greater vision, awareness, and pattern recognition of reality. So if you weren't following, logic has to do with collecting. So when you're collecting data, everything that's been cut, divided, and separated, apart, split, and dissected, in order to make sense of it and to compare and collect it, it needs to be done in a non-contradictory manner, which requires logic, and logic is the whole basis for collecting. And that's how you form patterns, is because you collect data about reality, you compare it, and you detect patterns. And logic is required for that greater vision, awareness, and pattern recognition of reality. Conscience and consciousness can develop towards the apotheosis of higher transcendental consciousness and the Eye of Providence vision of reality. Knowledge and vision of the past provides a guide and foresight to improve the future. This is the power to transcend the biological, environmental, and social conditioning programming. So I'll get more into the Eye of Providence at the end of this presentation, and more specifically to explain what it really is more in depth and how I can explain this demonstrably in reality and consciousness. That'll be in part 4. So you'll get more of it in this presentation, and then in part 4 you'll get some more explanation and to clear up what I was talking about before at the beginning relating to truth and all of consciousness, all of reality, and quote God, and how people get confused about that in their conceptual frameworks, and how it gets convoluted, and how that validates their imagination of some being, God, and that it exists and all that stuff. I'll explain that. You'll understand it. It all has to do with reification, objectification, and trying to make something real when it's just a concept, an idea, an imagination in our consciousness. But to explain the last paragraph, as this is hinting at what this is all about, is the apotheosis. If you're familiar with Joseph Campbell, apotheosis is part of his monomyth storyline, where you go through the darkness in order to reform yourself and remake yourself into a better person for the new world, so that you can create in the new world and create a new world. And that's the apotheosis, is that self-transformation process from a darker state to a more righteous state, to a more state of light and good, in order to leave the old world and enter a new world for you. Leave the old world that you were and enter a new world, and also leave the old world of corruption and enter back into the old world, but to create a new world. There's many layers of meaning in that monomyth. It's very interesting. So apotheosis is about the self-transformation. It means becoming God. It's at the end of this presentation. Let me just see if I can find it. No, I didn't even put it. It has to do with becoming a god, transforming into a god. That's why apotheosis is a self-transformative process, and it involves the apotheosis involves the transformation towards a higher state, and that higher state is transcendental consciousness. Transcendental consciousness isn't the reified, objectified truth, love, good, right, morality, natural, moral law as some force, some magical force existing outside, so that we can give it an objective reality. That's the authority outside of ourselves, external authority outside of ourselves. Anyways, I tried to separate this aspect, part of it into part 1 and part 2 here, and part of it into part 4, but it all ties together. It's all about the same aspect of higher living, realer living, more moral living, and that involves getting to a transcendental consciousness and having the Eye of Providence, which is having the vision, internal vision, to see reality properly. So you have to have a transcendental consciousness, a capacity to understand morality, have the vision of the past in order to have the vision and foresight of the future, because Eye of Providence, I don't know if you knew, but a providence, providence, has provisiere, and it just has to do with sight, seeing forward, foresight. That's all providence means. An Eye of Providence is actually having the eye to have foresight, having the eye to guide yourself into the future. Then people automatically associate it with divine. It has nothing to do with divine. That's all in your mind. You imagine and extrapolated some divine pseudo-spiritual thing. Oh, it's the Eye of Providence, it's God, oh, it's the one eye, oh, it's God. No, it's all symbolism. All of this is symbolism. You're all trapped in symbolic constructs that you think are reality, and you take these symbolism, the symbolism that you've imagined yourself or someone else has inculcated and invoked into you as a part of reality, and you reify it, you objectify it, and then it becomes real. It becomes a reality when all it is a symbol. And we've called it the Eye of Providence. What does it mean? It's an eye about the foresight of the future. It's a guide to your future. Anyways, I go into this more, especially in part 4, but just to understand what the key terms I'm using here. Transcendental consciousness has to do with you and evolving to transcendental consciousness. The Eye of Providence, the vision of reality from within, the inner light to see the outer light, that comes from you. Consciousness, not an external force. So all this is about transcendental consciousness, having the capacity to see into the future, the foresight to see where you're going, to see how your actions will affect others, all of that. This is the power to transcend the biological, environmental, and social conditioning and programming that we have currently created for ourselves and are currently living in. We can transcend the current condition and create a better world. Well, how do we do that? Well, it comes from the power of consciousness to affect the primacy of existence. And that's transcendental consciousness, is that power we have as humans. So, this gets pretty complicated, but that'll be more in part 4, I guess. I'll clear this up. But there's levels of consciousness, and then within the higher levels, there's higher levels, and then there's higher levels and lower levels within those higher levels. Anyways, transcendental consciousness, there's the first part where it's even the capacity to alter yourself, a self-renewal capacity for changing, for self-transformation, for apotheosis, to change yourself to become a better person. That's the real transcendental consciousness. But you can have lower forms of transcendental consciousness where you have the capacity to engage in this transcendental consciousness, means you are a higher order being, such as a human, versus lower order beings, such as non-humans, who are not at a default higher order consciousness capacity to then actualize a transcendental consciousness within themselves. So it's not that you automatically have transcendental consciousness. You have the capacity to actualize transcendental consciousness, to transcend the biological, environmental, and social conditioning and programming that you find yourself in, that has been conditioned into you by other people, by government, by society, by education, and that has us living in this way we're living. So if we want to transcend the way we're currently living, the power we need is the power of consciousness, and this requires a transcendental consciousness where you understand this apotheosis, self-transformative, self-corrective, self-reflective, self-analytical aspect of ourselves. Because if you don't engage in self-analysis, self-reflection, self-correction to evolve and better yourself and improve yourself, then you're not in transcendental consciousness. You may be a higher order consciousness compared to lower order consciousnesses such as non-humans, but within that higher order consciousness capacity of human animals, you are engaging life as a lower order being. A lower order consciousness within the higher order consciousness potentiality capacities. So I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about so far, but I am working on some infographics for that part 4 to really explain the real power in reality and in our lives to affect change, and who the real authority is, and where morality comes from, and where truth comes from. And spoiler alert, it all comes from us. I've been intimating this and indicating this in several small parts in my previous presentations. It's all about the power of consciousness, us, and all these other things that we externalize as real, even though they're just imagined. It all comes from the power of consciousness itself to imagine it and then to reify, externalize, and objectify it as a real thing in itself in order to give it validity and veracity as an existent thing in reality when it isn't. It's all consciousness tricking itself in order to believe what it wants to believe. Because again, these answers Consciousness likes to answer things, it likes to question things. Naturally, anyways, you can be dumbed down and put into a conditioned state where you don't question things, where you don't have curiosity, and that's essentially being dead as far as I'm concerned. This is this lower level living. Even though you are a higher order consciousness, capacity, potential being, you're not living up to that potential. You're living as a lower order consciousness being, focused on pleasure or survival or comfort or convenience, whatever. You seem to love your servitude, so you don't question, you're not curious, you don't doubt the current condition, you don't question it, you're not curious to learn more, you don't really care for truth. And so you just keep believing what you want to believe because it's comfortable and convenience, and it provides you with a perpetuation of that current condition, a persistence of your current state. It allows it to repeat into the future as a pattern so that you don't have to change. Because again, this power, this transcendental consciousness, apotheosis, self-transformation is all about change. That's what real living is about. Higher moral living is about becoming something better, and that involves change. That's what evolution is about. Evolution is change. So I'm not talking about body evolution. I'm not talking about transhumanism. I'm talking about real change for higher, truer, realer living. And this all has to do with morality. All the ancient wisdom has to do with morality, and that's what I realized when I had the epiphany about when I was doing my research into Ma'at and the Egyptian, and that had me have my epiphany on consciousness, and through the work on the trivium, all of it came together, and I understand so much more than I did, and I'm trying to express this understanding to other people in so many different ways, so that you can connect the dots and put things together and finally see the power of consciousness. Really, at least all the facets that I'm able to explain to you on how we fool ourselves, how we are our own worst enemies, how we believe whatever we want, and our propensity to choose answers that provide feel-good conclusions to questions we have, so that we can believe in those and feel good about ourselves and our position in the universe. So this has been work in past presentations, but it's all about the same thing as our power of consciousness and our ability to affect the primacy of existence in positive or negative ways. And this has to do with aligning and harmonizing with reality, with truth as it is, versus believing in imagined ideas and then externalizing and reifying them as reality, and then you create all these cults and religions and wars and murders and death, and it's all been based from consciousness. It hasn't been based in reality. If they would have been basing it in reality, they would have understood morality. But they didn't, because they were overriding the morality of reality. They were overriding reality, existence, and truth itself with the power of consciousness. This is the danger of consciousness. It's a double-edged sword. I've talked about this in other presentations. With great power comes great responsibility. Peter Parker's uncle in Spider-Man, that's a very famous saying. That's a saying that applies, that everyone needs to understand. With great power comes great responsibility. Human consciousness is a tremendous power. It's not shooting lightning bolts out of your eyes or anything. It's not Jedi style or whatever. Get back to the ground. Talk about the power to affect our own lives and lead our own lives in harmony with truth or against it. And we're all too willing to lead our own lives against truth in favor of the concocted imaginations that we invent in our consciousness, or other people invent and convince us of as believing in them as a, quote, truth. But it's not a truth. Anyways, I think I've gone on a tangent long enough. Sorry about that. Let's continue. There's just a lot, that I try to talk about to tie everything in to help everyone, the few people who go through my work, to help people understand what it is that I've recently understood about reality. And I keep trying to explain it, and I'm always tying it back to reality. I'm concretizing this, I'm objectifying it, it's all real, It's not imagined. I can explain it and demonstrate it, and you can understand it. I'm not talking about imagined things in our consciousness. It's all real. You just have to think about it and verify it. Test it in your own life. Look, analyze, compare, dissect, analyze it. Judge reality. Discriminate, differentiate, look at things, compare them, see things more clearly. This is what knowledge is about. The more you dissect, not talking about literal dissection and let's go into cells. Yes, you're going to learn more about physical reality that way, but you can do it in a metaphysical capacity to dissect things metaphysically. That's what consciousness is. Consciousness isn't a physical thing itself. It exists in the physical, and that's what everything anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's in a few slides. Anyways, I'll just stop there and I'll keep going, because I can just talk about side tangents and I'll relate to future infographics that I'll be talking about anyways, so it's better to just continue with my presentation. Sorry, thank you. Infographic number 7. Patterns, persistence, and knowledge. Patterns are a repetition. They demonstrate a form of persistence, which can become recognized as knowledge. It's always there, the pattern, the repetition is always there, but do you recognize it in order to grasp that knowledge, that aspect of reality, and bring it forth as knowledge? Persistence and repetition is the persistence and repetition is the methodology. Wow, I can't speak this morning. Persistence and repetition is the methodology behind science. An apple persists. Persistence indicates existence. Pretty simple. If something persists, it indicates that it exists. Because you can have something that appears for a blip, a fraction of a second, and you think you saw something out of the corner of your eye, but did you really see it? Was it really there? Probably not. But if you thought it was there and you wanted to determine if it really did exist, if something went by the corner of your eye and then it went around the building, like a car, you could run around the corner of the building and then see the car still persist. Was it really there or was it not there? Some things can't really be persisted. They're more complex in order to figure out how it happened, and then in order to make it repeatable and persisted again into the future, that can be more tricky. Maybe you'll need to create a new piece of technology to create some fluke of random occurrence in reality that only happens once every million years, but can be recreated at the press of a button if you develop the technology to do it or something. I'm just giving an example. So that thing that happened did exist, but it's not repeatable for a million years. So you can't know it as a truth, which will be my next slide, I think, the next infographic. If you can't repeat it, you can't verify it in reality, it's not really a truth. It might be a piece of knowledge, but knowledge has to be repeatable, so it's a possible piece of knowledge, and it turns into a belief if you believe it to be true, because you can't repeat it and verify it through demonstrable applications. If you can't repeat it, and it's not a pattern, it's not something in reality, then you can't really know it. You can know it as something that you thought you saw at the corner of your eye or something, so you'll have that knowledge, but was it real? What you saw, was it what you saw, or did your eye have you see something, or did your brain interpret what your eye saw? Did your mind or consciousness interpret what your eye saw as something else than what it was? So that's why you need the repeatability and persistence of that pattern in reality. And you see it again and again and again, and then it repeats and persists, that thing that you saw, or it doesn't. And then you realize, oh, my consciousness was playing tricks on me and I saw something that wasn't there. So, does that momentary thing exist, or was it something I only thought I saw? It's a valid question to ask. If it doesn't have a persistence and a repeatability as a pattern in existence, was it really existing? So it perfectly could be, but the purpose of of determining knowledge and truth is you have to have some way to verify it, which is the whole basis of veracity and verifiability. All has to do with truth. If you don't do that, then you don't have a truth. It's all in the etymology. All we have to do is look at words, analyze words and symbols and consciousness, and it's amazing what you're going to uncover about reality, about how we live in reality and how we create this human world reality that we've decided to create and live by and continue to live by. The methodology of science tests the repeated existence of things, even if they only appear for the duration of the method that tests for them. So you develop a test, just out of my head. You can test for the, I was going to say Higgs boson, whatever. That's like really out there for verifiability, but I guess the chemical reaction of something. You put, let's say, a carbon, baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, and vinegar. Vinegar is an acid and a base, and you mix them together and it produces a chemical reaction. So the appearance of that existence of that reaction isn't always there until you mix the two things together for that methodology of testing the existence of that reaction. And then when you use that methodology of mixing the two things together, you produce the result and the existence is there. So it's only the existence is only evidenced for the duration of that method that tests for it. And then afterwards, well, there's no more chemical reaction between between baking soda and vinegar because they're no longer in contact. This is just how science works. It's how we verify things in reality. It doesn't mean, because if you can't verify something, you can't claim it to be a truth. That's all it means. It doesn't mean it can't be a truth. Well, something could be a truth in reality, even if we don't know about it. It's still there, but we don't know about it, so we can't verify if it's a truth, even if it's a truth. It's not a truth until we can verify it. So if we think about it, then it's just a belief, because we can't verify it as a truth. I think I had something else to say, but I don't remember, so I'll just continue. Repeating the method will persistently produce the existence of an aspect of reality. Matter also persists like a repetition that is constant, but without any observable non-persistence. So like other things that persist, the beeping, a cold, a chemical reaction, they have intermittency of persistence in order to even be aware that there is a repetition, that there is a persistence of some kind as a pattern. Because a pattern has a break, a repetition has a break usually. But in matter and everything that exists, there's no break, there's no, oh, well, here's the rock existing, here's it not existing, here's it existing, here's it not existing. Oh, the pattern here, it keeps repeating into existence. That's not how it works. It's always here, but it's still a persistence. Because even though you don't have that non-persistence of non-existence to existence to see, oh, well, there's still a pattern of it coming into existence when we do certain things, it's always there. But it's still a pattern. It's still repeating. That rock is repeating into the future. I am repeating into the future. So are you. So that's the point about here, about linking patterns, persistence, and knowledge, how they relate together in that way. Infographic number 8, replication, persistence, and life. And I believe I'll be getting more into this in the next presentation, part 3 or part 4. Yeah, part 4. But I'll just introduce it here as it relates to how we're talking about replication and persistence and knowledge. Maybe it'll jog you some ideas and some connections as to where I'm going with this information in order to explain aspects of reality that I've been able to categorize and discern. So this might help you as well. Or it might confuse you. I don't know. All biological constructs engage in replication and renewal for persistence and survival of their being, compared to simple elemental components that are simply elements in themselves and not producing the emergence of bio-life. So I'll just explain that briefly. biological constructs in replication. Bacteria, plant, insect, dog, human, whatever. We are biological. We have this biological aspect of, quote, life, compared to non-biological, purely elemental components which simply do not reproduce themselves to emerge a biological life. Biological constructs engage in a replication. The cells replicate. They persist. That's how they persist into the future. They're not a static thing existing that persists into the future, which I'll be getting more into in the part 3 presentation on being and becoming, absolute and relative, static and dynamic. It should be interesting for those who are interested in these concepts and more understanding about this stuff. Might be boring for other people. So the biological constructs are life, biolife, because they replicate on their own. The non-biological matter doesn't replicate on its own. It's just what it is, and it persists indefinitely until erosion takes action on a rock or whatever else happens in the natural law systems of the universe that have nothing to do with morality, not natural moral law, just natural laws of the patterns and the way things operate in reality. So salt itself, it's just salt, but we take in those simple elemental components like salt into us in order for us to replicate and renew ourselves to persist into the future. So if there were not these simple elemental non-biological constructs, salt and the minerals and the vitamins and all that, well, our renewal into the future through our self-replicative capacity of our cells, well, that would not happen and we would die. Because we are not statically persistent elements in themselves like a rock. We're not static and persist by default. We can only persist through replication and renewal, which requires high energy consumption. A rock is low energy. A rock is more towards the entropic, calm stillness state, being static. It doesn't require energy consumption in order to persist. But us, for our persistence, we have the opposite kind of persistence. We are a form of stability. Anyways, this isn't part 4, but we're a form of stability that requires higher energy consumption as opposed to the simple elemental components, which don't, but they feed us in order for us to persist and maintain our existence. Enough of a side tangent there. Higher order complexity brings higher order functionality, such as consciousness, the higher form of life. So when I'm talking about realer life, higher life, truer life, this has to do with the life of higher order consciousness beings, which is brought about through higher order complexity in a biological construct. So I have 3 levels. Anyways, I won't get into that now. I'll just get into more tangents. I'll wait till part 4, and then you'll get more information on this, on how the classifications of the biological life, and then the higher order consciousness life, and then other aspects relating to transcendental consciousness and the Eye of Providence and all that, and realer life. So I have an infographic on that I sketched out, but I haven't done yet for part 4. Anyways, so stay tuned for that if you're interested in this information. I'll be analyzing more about reality related to this. Our bioconstruct, or being, allows us to see proportions and ratios between one thing and another, both external and internal comparisons. So we can compare things within ourselves, and we can compare things in reality that exist, or we can compare things that are in our imagination that don't exist. I don't know why that's there. I guess I was just tying it to proportions and ratios from before, in comparison. because that has to do with how we replicate and persist as a pattern, and how you determine a pattern is through comparison. I don't know. I'm at a loss right now as to the specific importance of that last sentence. Persistence of being is a repeatability of being. Repeatability is a ratio or proportion between what something is now compared to what it was before, as in the past or present before. So that's why I mentioned that sentence, I guess, because I was getting into this paragraph. Persistence of being is a repeatability of being. Your being repeats and thus persists. As I mentioned, how it does that as a higher energy consumption biological unit. Repeatability is a ratio proportion between what something is now. So something is now. Right now you're living in the now. And then you have a memory knowledge of what it was before. So say you took a measurement 5 minutes ago and you take a measurement now. Now you can determine a ratio or proportion between what something is now compared to what it was before in the past or present. Pretty simple, isn't it? But maybe you haven't thought about the complexity or the specifics of how we process our understanding of things in reality. But this is how it works. That's all I'm doing, is just presenting reality for you to understand how we and reality operates. Not bringing in any imagined ideas and superpowers and forces. None of that. I was more believing into that as a truth before, but I have since corrected my work to get away from those beliefs and imaginations that are not verifiable. What exists is repeatable, seen as the persistence of a state through time. Now, do you understand that? What exists is repeatable. Why is it repeatable and exists? Because it's the persistence of a state through time. I existed 1 second ago and I exist now, and that now was 1 second ago, and now, and 1 second from now will be the new now, and I keep repeating and I keep existing because I keep persisting through time. My state of being, my bioconstruct, is persisting through time. So I am repeatable, I exist. My consciousness is also persisting through time and is repeatable and exists. So what exists is repeatable, seen as the persistence of a state through time. It is knowledge of what exists because it is repeatable to show that it exists. Knowledge of what exists is knowledge of what exists because it is repeatable to show that it exists. This is fundamental stuff that people are not analyzing about truth and knowledge and belief in order to understand the differences. And how do you actually get knowledge that is a truth? How do you determine the knowledge is true? Well, how do you determine a knowledge actually exists, that it is true, because that's what truth is. Truth is existence. It's all, anyways, I think I present that in the next coming presentations. If not, it's all in part 4, but I think I do present some of it now. So yeah, existence is essentially truth. Truth is only a concept to represent existence, and that's what knowledge is. So if you want knowledge and you want to know that it's a true knowledge of existence, then it actually needs to exist, and it needs to be repeatable to demonstrate that it exists. So everyone who views science as flawed, science isn't flawed. Science is a very, very useful method for determining truth. And that's what it is. It's a methodology to test. It's a methodology to develop other methodologies to test the existence of truth, to test the existence of something that you claim exists. The problem is scientism and they don't even understand how their own process works. They imagine things, they invent things, and they call it science because they're not using real science. So this is the problem in academia, in people who aren't academics. Problem all over the world is people are for science and they have a blind belief in science, and there's people who are against science and a blind animosity towards science, and it's all people who don't understand symbols, don't understand meaning, don't take the time to go through reality, analyze the symbols that we've created to reflect reality and what they actually mean, at least in an etymological sense, in order to clear up our convoluted, obfuscated confusion that's been imposed upon us through conventions of society to tell us what words mean and confuse us and just have us regurgitating words and meanings without knowing what they mean and confusing ourselves about what we're talking about in reality. You have just the word law. People obey the law, but it's not moral, and it just creates a confusion and the convolution, the equivocation of morality with man's law. You know, it's just, there's so much manipulation in the world, and the only way out is through evolved consciousness, so that you can see all the manipulation, and the best way to do that is to know thyself, to know consciousness. And then you can know how you operate. Even if you don't know the 100 different ways that you're being manipulated, if you know how you operate and understand reality and process reality and how to find truth, then whenever you're presented with a manipulation, and if you have enough understanding of yourself, consciousness, and psychology, then you can prevent yourself from being manipulated because you understand the deeper, more foundational aspects of the basis of how consciousness functions itself and how it processes reality. Rather than understand a specific XYZ piece of knowledge that this is a methodology of manipulation, here's another methodology of manipulation, here's another one. Very useful, and they can, all those methodologies of manipulation, having knowledge and awareness of how they function, and then an understanding of how they function, can bring you to greater awareness of yourself, to know yourself even better. So sure, go that way too. But if you're developing knowledge of yourself without focusing on all the mind control, you can probably become aware of the mind control just because you have such an in-depth understanding of your own consciousness. But I would certainly promote learning about all the different ways of mind control, the methodologies of mind control that exist, such as Mark Passio has done, so that you can help yourself learn about yourself. Absolutely. Keep learning. Take in the information. Anywhere that has information about reality and yourself that's accurate, take it in and learn more about yourself. Alright, here we go. Here's the Truth Infographic. So the definitions on consciousness, persistence, repeatability, stuff on that. I've explained that so far. So now we're going to get into truth more. Specifically the word truth. So truth comes from the Proto-Indo-European root deru. So this means solid, firm, hard, accurate, real, upright. You can think of the term rock solid, and it implies a foundation. So this is what all the truth is about. Truth is solid, firm, hard, accurate, real, upright, rock solid. It's a foundation. So where does this come from? Truth and all these words. Well, in the etymology I've done in another place, it relates to a tree and to druids, which were triads or whatever if you look at the etymology. Relates to a tree. And that's what... Damn, I should have studied some more of my older work because it's a bit cloudy in my mind right now. A tree is solid. That's the solid. You even have the core. The word heart, kar, comes from heart. Comes from kar. Comes from core, and the core of the tree, the trunk. I have done other etymological work. I'm just having a sort of blank mind and trying to connect these aspects of my previous work, but I've related core and tree, the heart of the matter, the core of the tree, and then now I'm trying to tie it back to the truth and deru because it relates to... I should just open a web page and go to etymology and just look at truth and deru. But it has to do with the druids and the trees and true, because the tree is solid, it's firm, it's hard, and also it's upright. trees are upright. They're 90 degrees perpendicular to the ground most of the time. They're not perfect 90 degrees. Sometimes they slant, but essentially, it's upright, it's solid, it's firm, it's hard, accurate, and real. So essentially, truth is what's in existence because that's what's solid, it's firm, it's hard, it's real, it's there. And in other languages, so you have true, so you have deru, drew, true, druid, endure, durable. See, all these words have roots in the word deru, which come back to this aspect of durable, endure. And in French you have the word dur, which means hard. So it's not pronounced dur, it's pronounced in French dur. So that might not sound like a D sound to you, but that's in French how it sounds, is dur. Tu fais dur, t'es dur. You might not understand what I just said if you're not French, but it means hard. Okay, so in the French, dur, you have druid, endure, durable. It all relates to hard, solid, firm things. This is what truth is about etymologically. But truth is a symbol concept to represent what is existent, as opposed to unreal, non-existent imaginations. Truth doesn't exist in itself, because we're always talking about things that are true. This is true. A tree, true. The tree is hard and solid, so it comes etymologically from that correspondence in reality that we then created a symbol in words, and then it eventually became truth. But that's the symbol that reflects reality. So in my other work, I've always mentioned first comes reality, then comes knowledge from reality, where you create symbols to represent that knowledge. I guess that's part 3, where you create symbols to represent the knowledge that you obtain from reality itself. So the foundation is always reality. Reality is the foundation. That is the primacy of existence. So if you still don't understand how the primacy of existence is the primacy of existence, and it's not the primacy of consciousness, it's the primacy of existence and the power of consciousness. So I'm always trying to explain in all my recent presentations. Primacy of existence, because it is the foundation for all knowledge, through which we derive, through which we create symbols to represent that knowledge. But it all comes from reality, it all comes from existence, because that is truth. Truth, in its most basic form, is a concept to represent what is existent. It represents existence. It represents all. So maybe you can see now, you can see how many people, you've been taking the concept of truth, which is only a concept to represent existent things in existence, which would be reality. Truth is a concept simply to represent reality, to represent the universe, to represent all that is, to represent the universe. Universe, rolled into one, turned into one. Universe. The one thing, right? But the universe doesn't exist itself. The universe is only an aggregate grouping of things that we group together. It's only a grouping. It's not an actual existent thing. It's a grouping thing that we've created another concept for, and we call it a universe. Other ones are galaxies. Other ones are superclusters. Other ones are solar systems. They don't exist in themselves. They are identities created through groupings. They don't exist in themselves. They exist because we identify certain aspects in reality and create symbolic associations to represent those things that we see in reality, such as grouping order. But a grouping order doesn't exist. Truth doesn't exist. Morality doesn't exist. Government doesn't exist. But we create government into reality by our way of living. So, truth doesn't exist in itself, morality doesn't exist in itself, and government doesn't exist in itself, but government exists, and morality exists, and truth exists because we give them existence. Do you understand? We create them into existence. The truth comes from us. Things are what they are, but the word truth comes from our consciousness as a concept to represent things that exist in reality. So again, as I was saying with morality, if there were no higher order consciousness beings capable of understanding morality, then there would be no morality. As such, if there were no higher order consciousness beings capable of conceiving of truth and creating a symbol to represent truth, then there would be no truth itself, because truth itself is a concept created by consciousness. A truth in reality, a truth, something that is. And it'll exist without human existence or without human consciousness. But the truth, as a concept, to which you can then use the symbolic reference, a truth, to describe a aspect of existence as a truth, you can't do that. That word won't exist, the concept won't exist. It's not there. It'll be just things as they are. Well, sure, they'll be true, but there won't be anyone talking about truth. Truth won't exist as a concept because no one's conceiving of truth as a concept. The same is so for morality. The same is so for government. Government wouldn't exist if we weren't conceiving of government as a concept by which to live our lives by and creating the expression of government into reality for it to exist. If we weren't creating the expressions of behavior to live by the belief in government, then government would not be something that would be manifested into reality through the expressions of our behavior to live by the belief in government. If we weren't living according to the belief in government, then the belief in government wouldn't be an expression in reality and therefore would not exist anymore. So this is the power of consciousness. I've mentioned this in the part 1, reality and processing. This is the power we have. We can unmanifest things in reality that we create. We create. You can unmanifest it. All these things that we create. But if we didn't create it, you can't unmanifest it. It's part of the primacy of existence. Only things that you've created, altered, or made through the power of consciousness can be unmanifested through the power of consciousness. A house didn't exist before, it was manifested through the power of consciousness. It can be unmanifested, and so can government. Okay, so that's enough of a side tangent there. I'll continue with this infographic. So we have the bottom paragraph here. The objective universe with all that it contains, anything that is real existence, even if we can't interact with it. So as I was saying before, even if it's something that is unknown, well, yes, it still falls under the category or the concept of truth, even if we don't know about it, but we can't call it a truth until we can actually know it and verify it in reality. Then, and only then, does it become a truth. Prior to that, it may be a truth, but if you can't know it to be a truth in reality, then you can't call it a truth. This is the problem with symbols and the meaning associated with symbols, and the failure of people to use the symbols with the appropriate meaning to describe reality or themselves in the way they want. Words, meaning, definitions, symbols. People seem to lack in the ability to use these properly. I know I have. I'm working on improving it. A lot of my work helps me do that. I gain more clarity of definition and identity of things in reality by going into the etymology and comparing and contrasting and judging and analyzing and diagnosing everything, using the transcendental aspect of higher order consciousness to lead me towards understanding myself and to live better, towards more cooperative living with others in morality for true unity. Not simply to cooperate as an interaction to get something done. I'm talking about true unity. That's what my goal is. To get people on the same page about morality so that they can truly unite. Alright, to continue. So, reality, something is real, anything is real existence, even if we can't interact with it. But to actually know something as a truth requires it to have been demonstrated as such. So really, 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 really understand that. If you can't demonstrate it as such, then someone else can't really know it as a truth. If you cannot re-demonstrate it to others, then they can only believe what was demonstrated to you. So if you had it demonstrated and you saw it once, or maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and you're convinced it's the truth, you saw it, it's demonstrated, but you can't replicate it for other people, then all they're going to do is believe the truth you tell them is a truth, but it's not really a truth. Not for them. They didn't see it. They just believe what you said. So then we get back to belief, which I've, in reality processing, belief. What's belief? Well, it's just having loyalty, faith, and trust. Loyalty, faith, and trust in someone else. And you can have that for a concept or an idea. And then you believe in it being true because you have loyalty, faith, and trust in that belief being true, and then you're attached to it. And then you're bound to that belief because you choose to believe in it as a truth. This is the negative form of belief that people get attached to, where they believe, they have a belief, it's not demonstrable, but it's a truth to them. They believe it to be true. If you can't verify what someone says about reality, then you believe them. You have trust, loyalty, and faith in that belief being true. This is the big problem we have. We have things, we believe them, and then we accept them as truths. But did we ever go verify them for veracity? No? Well, then how can you even claim it's a truth? And furthermore, your belief that it is true is keeping you attached to that belief that it is true. But like I said in reality processing, you can have a belief, just do not have trust, loyalty, and faith in that belief being true. Because then you're going to create your worldview and your other conceptions based on the acceptance of a belief as truth, rather than keep that belief dissected as a belief. When you mix the belief as a truth, then you create a problem in your own foundational construction for perceiving, navigating, conceiving, and understanding reality. Because you've adopted something into your foundation, into what's solid, firm, hard, accurate, real, upright, rock solid, a foundation for reality. You've accepted a belief as true, it's not demonstrable, and then you're going to build other constructs, conceptions in reality, about reality, based on that foundational belief being true. This is the fundamental problem of belief in human consciousness, is when we accept beliefs as truths and then we keep building on them. So you build a first layer of foundation and then a second layer of foundation, and then you keep building tertiary foundations or same level foundations based on the previous parent foundation. You create new child foundations, but they're all going to be based on this underlying foundational axiom that you've accepted as a truth that isn't. So then you create a whole worldview, a whole sense of self, a self-image, based on a falsity. And this is how consciousness can be a double-edged sword. It can be our own worst enemy, because we can believe whatever we want to believe and live according to that belief. And that's what we have now. Believe whatever we want to believe and live according to that belief. Believe government is good and everything else is good and everything's good and everything's fine in our life. And then we can live according to that comfort and convenience of that belief in our lives. Belief is the poison. I think I left it out, but I think I'll add it back in as a slide, an infographic. Maybe not. Everything people tell you, everything you read and watch, has influences and impacts your conception of reality, we can easily be influenced by others into accepting beliefs as truth, unreality as reality. That's a quote from one of my other works. Also, here's another quote I made. Beliefs are a poison when taken as legitimate reality. Now that's the quote I was looking for when I just finished reading what I just finished reading. This is what I'm trying to emphasize, is when you take belief as a belief, that's fine. As a possibility, that's fine. Do not use it as a foundation in your construction of sense of self and worldview. Do not do that. You're just going to end up tripping yourself up down the line, where you're going to have to reevaluate all the constructed things you've made. And that's the problem in conspiracy and New Age and so-called truth movement, is critical thinking has not been developed enough for people to recognize the verifiable difference between a belief and a truth. And they mix concepts together and then take in concepts that they believe is truth, use them to create a worldview, and then later on they fight to maintain that worldview, or if they're mature they realize it was wrong and then they can heal from that erroneous worldview. But the problem is accepting it in the first place based on uncritical thinking, of not recognizing what a truth actually is, what knowledge actually is, and what belief actually is. And I'll read two quotes. Here's from Sherlock Holmes. What is existence but the absorption of and reaction to the data that the universe presents? You can either grasp these truths or you can misinterpret them to your constant and considerable agitation. So the universe presents data, and when you absorb it, that represents existence. And when you react to it, well, there's another reaction in existence, and there's another part of existence. But what's not mentioned? What's not existence? Oh, everything that goes on in your consciousness that is just pure imagination is not existence. The things coming from existence as data for you to absorb, that's existence. And then when you react to that data, and then you respond and react back into existence, that's existence. But the processing that goes on in your consciousness, whether an accurate parallel processing to objective reality, or purely subjective and inventive and imaginative and not parallel to reality, well, that's not part of existence, because it's going on in your consciousness, in the power of your consciousness, completely internal, but using objects from the external light, the vision of the external light in reality. You're using that to construct using your internal vision and internal light constructs and fabricating things in your consciousness. It's not the same thing. There's input from reality, and there's output into reality, and in the middle there's processing in consciousness, so that you can input from reality and output into reality. But the things that happen in consciousness are not automatically reflective of existence in reality. Existence in existence is what I meant to say. Anyways. Infographic number 10. Truth, verifiable, veracity. So now we're going to get into what I was talking about truth being verifiable and veracious. How do you determine the veracity of something? It needs to be verifiable. Truth is, quote, solid, as in real, demonstrable, and not simply belief you imagine in the inner light constructs of your imagination, which is what I just finished on the other. What I just finished on the quote from Sherlock Holmes. It's input and output. What's going on in the inner light constructs of your consciousness, the holographic projection screen in your mind, that doesn't represent reality. It can, but it doesn't automatically represent it. And solids in quotes, because when we understand the physical aspects, the solid things, yes, those are obviously solid as the foundation for our basis for knowledge. There's also the unsolid things, which are actually solid truths, which is the color blue, the color red, the color yellow, tall, short, soft, hard. These are aspects of reality that don't exist in themselves, but exist through others. They are particular or universal accidents that exist in others, or a universal accident that exists in a particular accident that exists in a particular substance. So this is in Metaphysics of Aristotle, but there's other ways you can describe it. You can just describe it as properties of things that exist. The properties don't exist in themselves, whereas possibly some properties can exist in themselves, but others don't. So then you have the classification of a substance, which can exist in another substance as a universal substance, versus an accident, which can be a particular accident or a universal accident that exists within a particular substance. Anyways, this is all in my previous work on language, reality, on metaphysics, language, and reality, I think. I forget the name of the presentation. But it's in there. Previous work, you can go look at it, understand more of what I'm talking about here. Truth is verifiable. Verifiable. Did you know that? Most people don't. Most people think truth is anything they can conceive of in their mind that they want to believe. They have some little connections. They have some analogies here, some analogous correspondence, some correlation. Well, there they go. That's enough for truth for me. They wipe their hands clean, and there you go. It's truth. But it wasn't verifiable. It's not a truth, but for them it becomes a truth because they don't understand what a truth really is. So let's look at the etymology of the words verifiable and veracity, and let's understand how they completely reflect a meaning of truth. So then truth is completely reflected through them. So to obtain truth, a veracity, something veracious as a truth in reality, you need verifiability of it being a truth. Otherwise it's not actually a truth. Even if it is a truth, as an unknown thing in reality as a truth, if you can't verify it as a truth, it's not a truth for you. You can't call it a truth if you can't verify it as a truth. If it's not repeatable to many people to repeat, even if in specialized areas of scientific methodologies and equipment, if multiple people can't repeat it, then it can't be a truth. If one person does something, oh, look what I did. Well, but you can't verify it, you can't repeat it. You just got to believe me, this is the truth. Well, then you're a sucker. Now that's what humanity is. Humanity is just a bunch of suckers, suckered into bullshit for thousands of years. Why? Because we don't want to use consciousness and develop our powers of consciousness to become transcendental consciousness, apotheoses, become, quote, gods of our human-created reality, and alter the way we live. To change. To transcend the social, environmental, and biological conditions that are imposed upon us, that we believe we're constricted and restricted by. We can evolve if we choose to. There is veracity behind the truth because it is verifiable. Veracity, truth, is a truth because it is verifiable. That's the whole point of a truth. Learn this, memorize it, understand it, because people don't. Latin veritas is truth, and Latin verus, or virus, is true. Veritas, verus, veritas, verus, veritas, veracity, verus, verifiable. Okay? The truth is true because something that is veracious and has veracity is verifiable. Truth, veritas, veracity is true, verifiable, verus. Do you understand the etymology? It's so simple. So if you're going to claim something is true, it is because it is verifiable in reality. Now, some things, as I said, you need technology and certain equipment to verify. So yes, you can have a certain degree of trust in something being true because it has been released in multiple ways as a demonstrable aspect of reality. It's not just one paper saying, okay, we've done this procedure once, and this is the result. Oh, here's the truth. And they say they've done this procedure multiple times, and here's the conclusion. And then other people have done the methodology multiple times, and here's the same conclusion. And then other people test, and it's the same conclusion. So how can we determine the repeatability, even though we can't do it ourselves? Is because other people have repeated, and other people have repeated what other people have repeated. So you repeat the repeatability yourself to test it yourself. And then other people can do that themselves. And the more people repeat it themselves and put it out for other people, well, then other people can see the repeatability of other people testing it. And that becomes a persistence in reality. And then that becomes an existence, and that becomes a truth. Do you understand? I might have been going too fast. A, quote, scientist tests something, and they test it 15 times under the methodology, and it's true. Okay, so it's been demonstrated. They tried to falsify it, it can't. Okay, then other groups of scientists do the same thing. So you have group 1, group 2, group 3 to group N. Let's say N is, we'll have 6 groups, okay, for a methodology. So each group tests the methodology several times, they repeat it, it's valid for them. More groups do the same thing, they all come up with the same conclusion. So here's your persistence, here's your repeatability in reality that demonstrates an existence. Why is it an existence? Because through repetition of the method, you've determined, you've produced the same repetition of persistence. It keeps persisting. The same conclusion is persisting when you repeat the methodology. And you've determined it's falsifiable. You can make it not happen by changing the parameters of variables. So by doing it a certain way, you produce a certain result, and that's the way it works. And that's how other people can verify it, is by other people doing the specific tests. Multiple of these other people do the specific tests, and then other people who don't do the tests can verify with the other people who have done the tests, and if the conclusions are all the same and they've done it right, tested for falsifiability to make sure it's not just a fluke, or other variables can make it false, or your methodology isn't sound enough so that it's always true no matter what you do, then it becomes a truth because it's persisted in reality and it's verifiable. If the methodology is sound and it's logically constructed to conclude something. If people are using bad logic and they all do it the same in bad logic and come to a bad conclusion, then if you're going to use that persistence of repeatability in bad logic as a conclusion for something, then you're going to end up believing in a falsity. So you have to, even if you can't perform the experiment, the methodology yourself, you should verify that the methodology that someone uses is sound and logical, so that their conclusions can be can follow through that logic. So if something cannot be verified, repeated, persisted through a methodology, then it cannot be confirmed through verification to exist, although it may have been true, happened, or existed, such as an event. So again, an event, multiple people write about an event through an objective lens. Let's say if we believe that they're not being paid or whatever, and they're objective, we read their accounts and they seem authentic, and the multiple correspondences produce a persistence of a certain reality. We weren't there in the past to witness that reality, but the persistence of multiple corroborated sources will produce a greater likelihood that that truth is a truth, and the greater likelihood, a greater degree of veracity. So that's another thing in the presentations that I've done, is a degree of truth. You can't really have 100%. How can you know that you know everything when there's still unknowns? You can't know that you know everything about something if there still might be unknowns that you don't know about. So if you could know the 100% of everything, then we're always at degrees of veracity, at degrees of being able to validate something as an objective truth. Some things we can validate as 100% true. The cup's in front of me. But something that happened in the past, well, I have 10 sources that tell me something happened a certain way. I have a high degree of veracity from these sources to conclude that that history, that reality did happen this way. Even though I can't verify it myself, I'm putting my trust, faith, and belief based on a degree of verifiability in reality, not just one account. I'll put it at a 1% verifiability and then you believe in it. But if you have 10 people, it's not just one person or two. When you cross-correlate different sources, it's not just a 1 plus 1 plus 1. It's like an exponential verifying capacity. If they're honest and they're independent, there's no agenda. It's like 1 and 1 doesn't make 2 verifiability, that it makes 4 verifiability. Because it's strengthened. It's not just 1 and 1 just to make 2, because 1 alone is just 1 alone. When you add more and more together, it makes it exponentially stronger. It just doesn't increase it just by 1 unit of that piece of evidence. So each piece of evidence increases the verifiability, the veracity by 1 point. Now it depends on the weight of the evidence, on the verifiable aspect of reality that you're bringing forth, that can bring a weighted exponential factor to increase the degree of veracity and a truth. Anyways, I think I'm getting off topic here. This is not information that I've done in an infographic to try to present more accurately. It's just how I understand how we conceive of reality and form truths. So I'm just trying to be as specific as I can, that there are degrees of verifiability depending on sources of input, depending on how much repetition of information you have. If we go back to, I think it was infographic number 4 or something, patterns of repeatability, where I showed 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. If you only have 1, if I give you the number 1, I ask you to tell me what's the pattern for the next number, and the pattern for the next number is actually a 5, you'll never be able to guess that it's a 5 because you only have 1 number. You're very weak in the power you have to determine the truth of a repetition, of a persistence in existence. If you have 1 and 1, well, is it going to be another 1? Is it going to be a 2? If you have 1, 1, and 2, okay, is the next one going to be 3 or is it going to be 4? I don't know. I don't have enough information. But when you have 1, 1, 2, 3, then the pattern emerges. Then you have enough. You have the 1, which is 1 data. You have the other 1, which is 2. You have the 2, which is a 3, and you have the 3, which is 4. So you have 4 pieces of data. Then you can see the pattern that exists in reality. Then you add 1 to the previous. You add the new number to the previous number in order to get the next number. That's the pattern. Could you see that pattern when there was only a 1? Could you see the pattern when there was only another 1? Could you see the pattern when there was a 1 and a 1 and a 2? Sort of. But it was still, you can't really detect it that well. But when you have the 3, then it becomes much more evident. And that's the way reality works, is when you have more sources, the evidentiary capacity of reality to demonstrate itself to you becomes more apparent. It's more evident. The persistence, the replicability of the pattern is in your face more than with less data. So that's what I'm trying to get at. So I've used another analogy with other aspects of pattern recognition and repeatability to demonstrate how we can gain greater degrees of verifiability of a pattern in existence through the repetition of data, of sources. So that's why part of it in news, get at least 3 sources for your story or whatever, multiple sources, because lies can create, you can have false interpretations of reality. But if you have people who continually come up with the same conceptions of reality given the same evidence, they can likely be right, or else they're all wrong too. That's a possibility. But through multiple corroborations of evidence that you're not able to validate the original source yourself, you have to use evidence of others. When you corroborate it, you can get a more degree of understanding the truth, which is existence. And it can be determined through patterns in existence, through the repeatability and persistence of patterns in existence. So I hope you're understanding what I'm talking about, because that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about sources. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, here's your pattern repeating 5 times. So when you have the Fibonacci series with 5 number sequences instead of 4, well, then it becomes even more obvious to see. And if you have 6, 7, 8, then it becomes even more obvious to see. So the more evidence you have about the repeatability, the persistence of a particular pattern in reality, then the more voracious it is, the more existent it is, the more it shows itself as being existent to you. Because you're the one in consciousness who is seeing and detecting these patterns of repeatability and this persistence. So I hope that made sense. I found it made a lot of sense, and it's, just in presenting this information, I've made an analogy and a correspondence which I didn't make before. This thing that I just explained to you between the patterns and the degrees of veracity, that's something that I could make into an infographic. But since I've just explained it, I probably won't. So pay attention. It's an important understanding if you haven't understood it before, that this is how reality works, is persistence. Reality and existence and truth as a concept work from the basis of a persistence and a replicability of that pattern of existence existing. And as I've mentioned, the pattern could be me as a human. It could be a pencil. It could be a sneeze. It could be a sound beep. It could be a flashing light. But patterns are everywhere. It is the basis for reality. It's just we, as a pattern, don't have an intermittence, and as a existent, non-existent, as a flashing light or a cough, which coughs or doesn't cough, a sneeze or doesn't sneeze. You can see it persisting in existence, even though there's no intermittence, to call it a repeatability or a pattern. But it does repeat, and it is a pattern once you understand, especially once you understand how biological constructs self-replicate and how non-biological constructs persist through non-replication, because they just are what they are. They don't have a requirement for high energy consumption in order to persist and replicate. They don't replicate. So anyways, there's different aspects of reality that I'm explaining in order to help facilitate an understanding of reality and consciousness itself. To continue, acceptance of an alleged truth this way will be a belief and not a real, quote, solid truth. This is a major distinction that people are failing to make, that of a real truth and that of a belief in a truth pervaded as truth. Many beliefs pervade as truth because of uncritical thinking. Infographic number 11, Truth the Concept. A truth is a particular aspect of reality that exists. So a truth, something. Truth itself is a construct to represent everything in existence. The truth does not exist in itself. It is a conceptual construct. Things that exist express the truth as the concept through being extant and exist as a truth. So something that expresses the truth as a concept, through being extant itself, this thing that expresses the truth, that thing exists as a truth because it is part of the truth of the totality of reality and existence and everything. So since that thing is an extant in existence, it's a truth of the truth. This is how our conceptual construct and symbolism reflects reality. The same is so for government or morality. These symbols have meaning to reference certain aspects of reality. Government exists as a way of life we choose to accept to live by. Morality exists as an expression of behavioral beings capable of understanding and engaging in moral or immoral actions. We are the expressions giving existence to government and morality. Us. It all comes from within. We're the ones who are creating everything. We're the ones who give meaning and purpose. It doesn't come from some outside force, some imagined being. Anything you try to reify, objectify, and give existence, when it doesn't exist, it only comes from your imagination. Oh, it might exist. Is it a truth? No, because you can't verify it. It's not a veracious aspect of reality that's been verified, so it's not a truth. You cannot call it a truth. Best you can claim is it's a belief, and you believe it as a truth, but it's not a truth, because you can't verify it. You can't demonstrate it. Understand etymology, the word symbols, as they are defined, what they mean, as I've been doing. I've been doing this. I'm telling you what the word means. You want to use the word in a different way than it means, well then you keep polluting your conception of reality through convoluted, obfuscated, symbolic references to reality that create a misformed conception of the world in your consciousness. You go ahead and do that if you want to. I don't want bullshit anymore. I don't want to believe whatever I want to believe. I want the truth, and I will align myself to that truth that I can verify. And anything else is simply a belief. And not a belief that I want to believe as a truth, not a belief that I want to be attached to in loyalty, faith, or trust. That's not the belief I want. I'll have a belief where I'm completely detached from it, where it's only a possibility, not as something that I want to be true or need to be true. Just as a truth that is a truth, if it's a truth, if I can determine it's a truth. And if I can't determine it's a truth, if I can't verify it, then it's not a truth. And that's the way it all works. And people need to get into this mode of thinking. I mentioned it in Reality and Processing, the previous presentation. You need to separate the difference between truth and belief. You need to get it into your consciousness whenever you think of things, to learn how you're categorizing and associating things. You don't just put them into the category of a truth when it's a belief, or believe in something as a truth. It's a detriment to your ability to perceive, conceive, understand, and navigate reality. And if you don't understand that, then you don't understand how consciousness functions. You don't understand the importance of truth in your consciousness and in your life. Truth is what matters most. Truth and morality is the way to higher living, realer living, and truer living. Alright, let's continue with the infographic, number 11. The truth, the same is so for government, I already read this. Sorry. Last little part, little sentence here. The concept of truth is from consciousness, and particular or universal truths in reality are determined from consciousness, even though they exist. So I'm trying to make, I've said it before, a truth can exist, but if you don't know it's there, then it's not a truth for you, even though it's something that exists in reality. If it's an unknown, it's not something you know, therefore it's not knowledge, therefore it can't possibly be a truth. And if you want to imagine it as a truth, well then you can imagine it as a truth, but is it a known in reality? Did you verify it as a piece of something in existence that's demonstrable, that's verifiable, through a methodology of some kind? No? Well then don't call it a truth. So all these truths come from consciousness. The determination of a truth comes from consciousness through this processing that we have. That it's something in existence, I can verify it, it's repeatedly demonstrable through a verification process, a methodology, and then it's truth. But where did that truth come from? Prior to your processing in consciousness, you did not recognize that as a truth. But after your processing in consciousness, then it becomes a truth. So you see, do you understand how government comes from consciousness, and then we create it as a way of living, as a belief we propagate, and then other people live according to that belief? Morality and truth are the same. They're not the same, but they work along the same principles, that they are created from consciousness and are expressed through us or aspects of reality. So morality is created by us and is expressed through us into reality, whereas truth is created by us but is expressed by everything in reality as it is. So truth is more detached, dealing with everything, but morality is completely about us, and government is completely from us too. Morality is from us, and government is from us. We create government, and the truth is only determined by us from consciousness. Otherwise it wouldn't be called the truth, and it wouldn't even be categorized. An apple wouldn't be an apple. You wouldn't even recognize it as an apple if there wasn't consciousness to call it an apple, categorize it, and recognize it as such. That's what I'm saying here. Truth is from consciousness. Either particular or universal truths in reality are determined from consciousness, even if they exist. Prior to a consciousness declaring it as a truth, recognizing that it exists, well, then it isn't something that you can read somewhere in a book that says that that's a truth and it exists, because no one has come across it to say that that's a part of existence for other people to learn about. It's just something there and nobody knows about it. So the universe doesn't exist, neither do galaxies. These are notes I have at the bottom here, not as part of the infographic. They're groupings with boundaries to provide a comparative framework for analysis and identification. That's all it is. Oh, what are these things grouping together in space? Well, we're going to isolate them. We're going to compare and differentiate. Well, there's more space in between this grouping of things with space, and then this other thing of groupings with space. Well, these two groupings have more space between each other than the smaller things within those groupings have between each other. So we're going to use space as a differentiation and as a comparative framework. So we got boundaries here and boundaries here. We're going to call that one galaxy, and here's another galaxy. So there's our analysis and identification. We've identified two galaxies. Even though a galaxy isn't a thing in itself, it doesn't exist as a thing in itself. It's not an apple, it's not an orange. It's a grouping of things in space that we've identified as a galaxy because they're more grouped than empty space. So we've identified the grouping as a something. Okay, so galaxies exist, universes exist. Why? Because in our consciousness we've created a grouping, a boundary as a comparative framework to compare one thing to another and say this is galaxy 1 and this is galaxy 2. That's all. Did the universe, does that exist? Well, it exists as, just everything being there. It's all there. But we put it all into one package, we group it all into one package, turned into one, rolled into one. That's what the word universe means. Roll it into one, and there's your one package. It's a one grouping, it's a universe. That's what we do. It doesn't exist as its own thing. You can take a bunch of apples and group them together. Apple exists as its own thing. Galaxies don't exist as their own things. They have things within them that group up and create that grouping order. But it's not a thing in itself. So I just want to make that distinction to help you understand the level of existence of things. Things that exist in themselves and things that exist because we identify and give them existence. So truth, morality, universe, galaxies do not exist in themselves. They exist through consciousness giving it power to exist. So truth, consciousness creates that identifier and calls it truth to represent everything, which is what universe represents. It's just everything, all. Same what we do with galaxies, solar system. Morality. So morality is not the truth out there expressing through everything, but it's an expression through us. We literally create it into being, just like the government. We create the government into being through expressions of us. So we are also expressions of truth through existence, but so is everything else. So without consciousness, there is no discernment of things that exist from the unknown yet to be identified. There is simply everything that exists as truth, all the unknown. So everything together, all the unknown, everything together, yeah, you could say that's all truth, but if you don't know any of it, how can you even say something is a truth if you don't even know it's there to exist to call it a truth? So human consciousness is what discerns things that exist from, just pure imaginations that can't be identified as things known to exist. Otherwise, you could just say everything that you imagine, everything that's unknown and known is all true. It will just be what it is, and you don't even need the word truth, it's just what it is in existence, but there's no consciousness to recognize it as such and give it a word symbol and a conceptual understanding and identity to represent everything that is. So it's not there. The word truth isn't there. The concept of truth isn't there. There's just things that are. So when we come in as consciousness, we create a symbol and we represent it as truth, reality and existence, and all and everything. Well, there you go. There's the concept of all that. But allness doesn't exist as a thing in itself. Existence doesn't exist as a thing in itself. It's a grouping, conceptual construct that we use to make sense of reality so that we can reference things in reality. Alright, infographic number 12. This was my attempt to try to visually represent categorizations of truth that I've come up with, that I've been able to discern as distinguishable in reality. So please try to follow along. It might be a bit confusing. So far I've talked about universal and particular truths, such as the truth and a truth. So the truth itself is the universal truth, the conceptual construct. It's the concept of truth itself as an absolute. Everything that was, is, or will be falls into the categorization of this universal, the truth itself, and itself in quotes because it's not in itself. It's just an imagined itself. It's not an actual thing. So within the all-universal truth, the conceptual construct of everything that is, well, then you have particular truths in reality, particular things, something that was, is, or will be. Not everything, but a particular. So a particular truth exists in reality, whereas a universal truth is only a conceptual construct. So particular truths, for example, are a specific one related to a blue shirt or red shirt or yellow shirt. Another particular truth, which is universal, not as the universal truth, the concept itself, but a universal truth in the particular truths of reality. Do you understand? Might be a bit confusing. Re-listen to what I just said. Blue, red, yellow shirt is a particular truth in reality. There are particulars of a particular truth in reality. 1 + 1 = 2 is a universal truth in reality. It has no... The color of the shirt, it's relative, who has it, where it was made, whatever. But 1 + 1 = 2, it's absolute, it's universal. It's not the truth itself, so we're not in the category of a conceptual construct of the truth. We're in a truth, in particular truths in existence, right? So a truth is a blue shirt, a truth is a red shirt, a truth is 1 + 1 = 2. But that a truth, 1 + 1 = 2, is itself a universal and absolute. Now, murder is wrong differentiates from the previous two because these previous two had nothing to do with morality. They were just truths, a truth, a particular truth in reality. Murder is wrong is a particular truth in reality, but specifically deals with a true way to live, a moral way to live. So you can understand how the categorizations are going to get into what I've termed truth level 1 and truth level 2, the different ways that we talk about truth. We say that that's a true way to live, or that's not true. You're not living in truth. There's different ways we talk about truth. So there's truth level 1 and truth level 2, and you can see how they reflect in here. So in a truth, particular truths in reality, you can have a blue shirt, red shirt, 1 + 1 = 2, actual things in the past and present, which is a truth level 1. But you can also have what is currently now and is, or was before, as currently existent. You can have moral truths of truth level 2, the true way of living morals. So murder is wrong. If that's currently accepted as the way things are now or before, then that's a truth level 1 of the actual past or present living according to that way that murder is wrong. But truth level 1 is only what's actual now or what has happened. It's not what's going to be. We aren't there yet. That's what's going to come. That's what we're living for. We're living for the future, living in the now, as the now becomes refreshed by the future. We're always going towards the future, which becomes actualized into the now. It's the future comes into the now, and then we experience the now, but it's from the future if you look at it as a linear progression. And then the now becomes the past. The future becomes the now, and the now becomes the past. The now is constantly being refreshed. The now only exists through a persistence of the past, showing that what was created in the past is persisting in the now and is still existing. Whereas if it didn't persist, it would only exist in the past and not exist in the present. So it persists into the now and exists in the present. And what comes into the present comes from the past, but also comes from the past that still exists, but it also comes from the future and what we're creating. So we create things from our vision, our foresight, our Eye of Providence, our Transcendental Consciousness. We envision better ways to live, improved ways to live, and we evolve towards those capacities of higher order living, truer, realer living, according to truth level 2, which will give us the potential to create a better future. And we can bring that into the present, and then it'll become actualized as the truth level 1. So these are the different categorizations that I've come up with. You have the truth itself, and then you have a truth. So within a truth, you have truth level 1 and truth level 2, and that's the truth as things are, and then the truth as things can be, or as things should be. So that's just an infographic to show the categorizations of these different truths that I've been able to discern and how we talk about truth. So truth itself, as you can see, it can be very convoluted as a concept to I'm at a loss for words, but to explicitly, consciously, and critically assess and to diagnose and evaluate and analyze. This is what it looks like. And this is all going on intuitively, subconsciously, unconsciously, in our own consciousness. We are talking about truths in all these different ways without knowing about it, and oftentimes we're mixing them up, and we get confused when we talk about a truth, because we have essentially we have a particular truth, we have universal particular truths, we have absolute or relative particular truths, and then we have moral truths, and then there's the truth itself as a concept, a universal truth concept. So it depends on how you're talking about truth, but these are the different ways. I hope it's valuable to you. I find it very very useful to understand. Infographic number 13, a little extra explanation to elaborate upon how we go from existence to knowledge to truth, which I've been explaining since the beginning of this presentation. So if you want truth, if you have truth, there's truth and you want truth. Well, how do you get to truth? Knowledge is required to determine truth. So you need knowledge to be compared and corresponded across reality with logic. So if you have knowledge, then there's knowledge. So do you want knowledge, and how do you get knowledge? Well, knowledge requires examples, demonstrations, and replications of extant aspects of reality. Pieces of data about reality, solo, that are not correlated for non-contradiction. So that's how you get knowledge, is examples, demonstrations, and replications of extant aspects of reality. But they're all solo, they're not correlated for non-contradiction. It's just knowledge. It's just things that are happening in reality, right? Whether you're being deceived into believing that these things are happening as a false repetition and false persistence through false sources that give the appearance of a reality, simply because they are a source that create multiple sources and creates a corroboration and the illusion of a veracity of reality through the repetition and persistence of something. So it's not correlated in correspondence. That's why if you only have knowledge, you don't have the truth, you don't have an understanding. In my previous presentation, there's an infographic on knowledge and inner lights, inner vision, and I was making the distinction between knowledge and understanding. So if you have knowledge of something being wrong, but you don't understand that something is wrong, well, you only have a knowledge of a certain aspect of reality that someone told you. If someone tells you X is wrong, you can repeat X is wrong as a piece of knowledge and regurgitate that. But do you actually know that that is the truth, that X is wrong? Did you determine that that is the truth? Or when you develop an understanding and you verify this knowledge to compare it and correspond it across reality with logic, then you can determine if it's actually a truth or not. So the whole start of all this is in existence and reality, where the examples and demonstrations and replication of existence come from. So the existent that exists can be collected as data, as an example, a demonstration, and a replication that it does indeed exist. So here's a piece of data, something, X. And someone can repeat something to you and make you believe that that's a part of reality, or you can go get it on your own, some single piece. But there's a demonstration or replication of an extant aspect of reality, but it's alone. It's one piece of data, not correlated with others for non-contradiction. So all you have is knowledge. And as an example, someone tells you that something's wrong, or someone tells you that something is a certain way, or some certain thing. Until you go verify that in reality, to truly understand it by using logic to understand, and then obtain the truth of how that knowledge or why that knowledge is the way it is, then you don't have the truth, you just have a piece of knowledge, which does not have understanding. So if you want truth, you need knowledge, and if you want knowledge, you need existence and reality to provide you with the data to have knowledge, and then you need logic to build up on that knowledge in order to reach truth. In my language and reality presentations, 5 parts, I've gone into this and how logic is your way to truth. Logic is what collects all the data and allows you and creates non-contradictory synthesis between everything, so that you can arrive at a truth. You can synthesize aspects of reality together, join them together, connect them, correspond and correlate, and then grasp at a truth in reality because you have parts of reality connected, the dots are connected. But that requires logic to connect it, to collect everything and form non-contradictory synthesizing of everything. So that requires, at the basis of it all, existence to knowledge, then to truth through logic. Some people correspond or correlate not on comparative evidence, but accepted on imagined correlations in their consciousness, not reality. So this is false analogy or false correspondence conclusion. So you analogize, so because something here, X, has a certain property or characteristic, then and you see Y has a certain property or characteristic, so they relate in that one aspect, then X has another property or characteristic, number 2, and you're going to assume through the first analogy and correspondence that Y also has the same property of X, even though it's not demonstrable in Y. But you're going to assume it's there because you've already seen property 1 in X and property 1 in Y. There's a correspondence there. You're going to assume there's a correspondence even though you can't see one, even though it's not demonstrable. But you're assuming it. This is the false analogy and false correspondence that people engage in. Infographic number 14. I'm going to give terms and definitions, etymological breakdown for absolutes, because I will be using that word as a correspondence to Truth 1 and Truth 2, the relative and absolute, and how they apply in both aspects, both respects at the same time, but in different perspectives, and they switch. Anyways, we'll get into that. So I'm just providing, and I will also be talking about it in the next presentation, but I'm doing the definition here, as I will already be talking about it in this presentation. So if you have a substance 1, let's take this red, pink, purple, whatever, tablet, and say that's something to be dissolved, okay? Then you have substance 2, which is a solvent. It's an active agent that does the dissolving. And then you put substance 1 into substance 2. Okay? What you end up with when you put substance 1 into a solvent for substance 1 to be dissolved is you end up with a solution. Substance 1 is dissolved in the solvent, substance 2, to produce the solution. Substance 1 is now the solute in solution. So substance 1 and substance 2 have mixed together, and now they've produced a solution. And substance 1 is now the solute in solution. That's the way it's termed. So if you look at the word solute, it's from the Latin solutus, free, unfettered, and it's a past participle of solvere, to release. So it's a past participle of the main verb here, solvere, which means to release. So it's in the past. It's saying something that has been released. Okay, so it's being in solution. You're dissolved. You're loosened. You're released. You're free and unfettered. How? Well, you could look at it as you're released, free and unfettered, dissolved and loosened from your original state of being that substance 1. You're dissolved from that. You're loosened from that state of being that one thing. You're freed from that state of being that one thing. And now you've formed a solution. And the solvent is a substance able to dissolve other substances. So you have the substance, which eventually becomes a solute after you mix it with the solvent, but originally it's just a solvent, and that's because it's able to dissolve substances. And it's a present participle of solvere instead of a past participle of solvere. So a solute is a past participle of solvere, to release, meaning it has been released, because the solute was formerly a substance that went through another substance, which was the solvent, and then formed a solution, but it is the solute in solution. It is what has been released. It's a past participle of solvere, so it's been released. The solvent is a present participle of solvere, so it's not released, it's releasing. It's what's doing the releasing. It's the releaser. It's what's acting upon the solute to create the solution. Solvent acts upon the substance. It creates a solution in which the substance is now a solute in solution. Solute, solution. So the solute is the main part of the solution, which was created through the releasing agent of the solvent. So you see how past participle and present participle, even though they both come from the same word, solvere, because of the tense of the word, one is in the past, so it was solvered, it was released, and one's in the present, so it's releasing, it's doing the releasing. It's got the power, it's the active agent to do it, to change the substance. So I'm just explaining the process of how this works. That's why I got the infographics. If you put one into the other, this is what happens. This is how they relate etymologically, even though they're the same word. A solvent and a solute, they come from the same word, but they have this tense. present participle or past participle which changes how the word is used. Even though they're the same word, they don't have the same use. So, solvere comes from the Proto-Indo-European root, lu, to loosen, divide, cut apart, untie, separate. Now, what is the other word that we were just talking about that had to do with dividing, cutting apart, and separating? Wasn't that knowledge? Wasn't that scio from science and conscience and conscious and consciousness? Was this root in sky or skay, however you pronounce it? And here we have lu, another word related to that same concept. I just want to mention that. I might bring it back into the future. If I don't, it might be another avenue of research that I forgot to do, or that you can do on your own. But just remember this comparative analysis. Now we have these two Proto-Indo-European roots. One is skay or ski, sky, whatever, and this one's lu. And they both essentially mean the same thing. So I'll just indicate this now. I don't know if it might be a flawed intuition, but we have the solute is put into a solution or to dissolve it from the substance it was in order to make it a more purer absolute substance when you continue to the etymology of absolute and the reversal of solute. So it could be that in order to make something pure, better, more improved, more quality, to make it towards the absolute state, first it needs to be loosened, divided, cut apart, untied, and separated. So you need to make a solution from your solvent which was less pure, less quality, etc. And how this relates to knowledge is, so how do you get to that pure state, that more quality state, that more evolved state? Well, you need to cut, loosen, divide, untie, and separate. So how does this relate in the information that I've previously been presenting? Well, that relates to knowledge. So how do you evolve and change and become better quality, more absolute, etc., as per this conception that we're going with? Well, it needs the tying, the loosening, the dividing and cutting apart of knowledge in reality in order to bring you to that more qualitative state through the refinement of those things in reality, where you can loosen, divide, and cut apart and separate yourself from those lower quality things and reach towards a higher quality thing. So here's just another analysis that I've made in my presentation that I don't think I have an infographic for, but so how do you evolve consciousness? How do you get towards that quality, the more absolute, more purified, more quality state of being? Well, you need knowledge of reality, and you need logic to synthesize the knowledge in a non-contradictory manner, and that will allow you to attain a verifiability of the veracity of some aspect of truth. Ta-da! So here's how the process of alchemical distillation, because I've done an infographic on that as well, and how we dissolve the impure substance 1 into a solution as a solute in order to loosen, divide, cut apart, untie, and separate it, to make it free and unfettered, to release it, dissolved and loosened, from its more impure substance 1 state. Does that make sense? It makes a lot of sense to me. If you're not familiar with this, you can go look at my previous work on natural law alchemical distillation to understand more of what I'm talking about and how it relates to the self-transformative apotheosis aspect of aligning ourselves in greater degrees with the truth level 2, the envisioned, better, improved, more right, more good aspects of or ways of living that we can choose to align ourselves towards and live by taking what we've envisioned from our consciousness as a potential better way and then actually bringing it into reality as an actual way to live in our lives. So here's the beginning of alchemical transformation and evolution and betterment. Here's it explained etymologically through this infographic. So infographic number 15. Since absolute and solute come from the same word, what's the difference? So here we're going to look at going from a substance to a substance 2 to then produce a solute in solution, and then back again towards becoming a substance, but this substance will be different because it will be made purer and more higher quality because we've already previously removed the impure aspects. So you can switch between infographic 14 and 15 if you're having trouble following along. Substance 1 goes into substance 2. There we go. Follow the arrow, second picture, now they're together. Now the third part, follow the next arrow, the third step, is when they're dissolved together. So that's in infographic 14, is when they were dissolved as substance 1, as the solute in solution, dissolved by the solvent, which acted upon it to free it, to loosen it, to release it, to make it unfettered, dissolved as a solution, separated from its former substance state, so that you can remove yourself from the impure, the lower quality, the less refined, so that you can refine yourself more. So after it becomes a solution, then the solute is in solution with the solvent, and now you can form an absolute from that solute. So you need the substance 1 and substance 2 to form a solution with a solute. Then the solute will become an absolute. So all this I discovered just by being curious again with the terms absolute and relative, because I still found there was so much confusion with people using these terms, absolute and relative, and they don't seem to understand the scopes of the applicability of these terms, or how they're even relevant in existence or irrelevant in purely conceptual imaginations of your consciousness, and how they're just arbitrarily imposed symbolic associations to create a validity, a veracity for your concept, even though your concept is just a concept. But you're going to call it an absolute because, again, you're trying to reify, objectify, and externalize something that's an absolute in your mind. You try to make it an absolute in reality, but it's not an absolute in reality. A pencil's an absolute in reality. A piece of salt is an absolute. A dust, a planet is an absolute in reality. The things that you imagine in your consciousness are not automatically absolutes in reality, and just because you call it an absolute, because you envision it as an absolute, because that's the conception, the idea that you've created about this thing, such as, quote, God, that you're going to call it an absolute, it doesn't make it an absolute. So this is why I've gone into the etymology of truth, of knowledge, conscience, consciousness. I'm trying to explain what the words actually mean through the symbolic reflection and respect to reality. Because that's where the symbols come from. That's where the meaning comes from, is in reality. So if you're going to use a symbol, learn what the symbol means as it reflects reality. Otherwise, what does it actually mean in reality? You might be using a word and not using it properly. And that's what I find out people are doing with belief, with truth, with knowledge, and apparently with the word absolute as well, and relative. This is being used inappropriately